Story 1. Yes, the librarian at my school in a big city was one of the nicest people ever. He was relatively introverted and never got into a relationship. He found small joys in life and was from a small town in Vermont. He had one brother and four sisters, so he grew up modestly and with love. He loved to help all students outside the library as well. He would give rides to the store, do small chores and repairs, and participate in all gatherings he was invited to. There was absolutely nothing wrong with him. I was in a different city when I heard about his death. I stopped my car on the roadside and cried for half an hour. He touched the lives of everyone he met, and I am sure everyone felt equally sad at his passing. Story 2. My great-uncle grew up on a farm in rural Wisconsin in the early 1900s. He fell in love with a girl as a teenager and was ready to leave with her on the train to a bigger and brighter future. His mother guilt and scolded him, so he ultimately stayed to take care of the farm. He never met or pursued another woman his whole life. My grandmother had 8 children, so he always had family around to fill the void of the family he never had for himself. He would have been a great husband and an even better father, but he was always filled with purpose and opened his heart to troubled people in his community who needed purpose and belonging themselves. He always had a band of the forgotten to take care of, and I loved him more for it. Story 3. I knew a man who passed away at 58 from a heart attack. He lived down the hall in my apartment. A nice person, worked as a librarian, and went to church on Sundays. No children, no siblings, and his parents were deceased. He was not attractive, but he genuinely tried to put himself out there by networking and attending social events. He organized many job networking coffee meetups in my city that he set up online. He also had many hobbies like tennis and going to board game meetups. He definitely had an active social life. He was an overall decent man who wanted to settle down, have a girlfriend, a wife, and children, but it never happened. He told me every time he asked a woman out, he was rejected. His online dating success rate was non-existent. He never got a single date or direct message through those sites, and time was passing quickly for him. I remember a few years ago when he was in his early to mid-50s, I ran into him in our apartment hallway. He was interested in an older single woman he had met. He was nervous but took a chance, and she rejected him. That seemed to be his breaking point because he broke down and cried in front of me, saying, "I'm going to die alone." I felt for him. Sadly, he did. Story 4. I administer deceased estates as my job, and where I work, we often handle estates for people who were alone or single their whole lives. Before this job, I had not realized just how many people that was. The brother of one of these people described the deceased as having always been a single person and never having been in any relationships. I think of that as a category of person now. There are those for whom being in a relationship is not and never will be a priority. They are content with themselves. Sometimes these single persons have family, such as siblings or nieces and nephews, but very often they were solitary, with no one there with them in the end. Story 5. My great-aunt, my nanny, was the sweetest woman on earth and an excellent cook. I personally believe she was asexual. From what my grandpa told me, she never had a boyfriend or anything resembling one. She did not die alone. Our very large family was all in the room when she took her final breath in the hospital. She was immensely loved and is still very deeply missed. Story 6. He knew he couldn't get his life together. He grew up in New Orleans and had many issues with drugs and alcohol. He was always trying to connect with every girl in our friend circle, and if any of them responded, he would act strange and ignore them. During the COVID-19 quarantine, he moved back home to New Orleans and went on a long binge, drinking and using drugs for 4 days straight without drinking any water. He died from a heart attack in his 30s. Story 7. I have a friend who has been single her whole life, still a virgin at 54 years old. I feel she will be this way for the rest of her life. She only has 2 friends and keeps us both at a distance. I call her once a week, but she never wants to go out. I'm sure she has millions saved up. I once got her to a concert. She had fun and said, "Let's do it again in 10 years. It's year 9, so I'm not going to let her back out of it." Story 8. As much as I hate to admit it, and as much as this is the last thing in the world I would ever want to have happen, I cannot help but feel like this is my future. Story 9. My great-grandmother died alone. She lived in a very old-fashioned religious part of my region. She gave birth to my grandmother outside of marriage and never told anyone who the father was. She was shunned by her entire community for this. My grandmother moved away when she was only 16, leaving my great-grandmother to live alone. She never married, never had any friends, and never received visitors. When my grandmother passed away last August, her last wish was to be brought back home and buried alongside my great-grandmother. Their gravestone now reads, "Mother and daughter, born together, lived apart, but buried together." Story 10. My cousin was single, had no children, and was an only child. I only ever heard of one boyfriend. I think her father was very controlling. When she became ill, she moved in with my sister and told her about his constant verbal abuse. I never knew. It explains a lot. In later years, she had hoarding issues. I tried to help for a long time before she moved in with my sister. Caring for her became very hard, leading to conflict, and she moved into assisted living by choice. She never spoke to any of us again. Now she has died, and we are dealing with the probate situation she left behind. I feel really bad knowing she had such an unhappy life and also resentful about having to clean up one last mess. She was a librarian. I'm noticing many librarians represented here. Story 11. Alone as in single? My grandma was single from about 34 until she died at 77. My mom's dad royally betrayed her, and she swore off men. She was a stay-at-home mom. He moved their family to Texas, bought a house, a couple of dogs, and then met someone else while on the road for work. That woman would call their house and drove my grandma crazy. He left one day and abandoned her in a new state with 3 little kids, no money, and no car. Her mom drove out there from California. My great-grandma was a strong woman, to bring them all back. I think he saw my mom a couple of times growing up, but that was it. When her dementia got really bad, she thought I was my grandpa. I'm a woman and don't look like him, but sure. She'd go on and on about his cheating, leaving the family, and how badly he broke her heart. I never grasped how much it hurt her until her mind made her vulnerable. Story 12. Yes for things. 1. Incredible low self-esteem with constant crushes on his female friends who were already in relationships. He would do anything for these friends, but usually not much for himself. We had to stop him from being taken advantage of by people who didn't know better a few times. 2. He didn't take care of himself. He didn't dress well, didn't eat properly, and worked all the time. He supported his parents because they couldn't work anymore. In his mid-50s, still single, he worked 12-hour shifts as a manager at a theater. The job didn't pay very well. He often got second jobs when his hours were cut. 3. He got sick after COVID-19 and we told him to get it checked out. He never did, either because he was always working, didn't have the money, or both. He didn't think it was a big deal and tried to power through it. 4. He was having trouble breathing and chest pains, symptoms that usually lead to very serious events. He never told anyone because he dismissed them and didn't want to worry people. He died in his sleep suddenly without ever going to the doctor. Don't light yourself on fire to keep others warm. Don't hesitate to reach out if you're not feeling well. Don't work yourself to death. Story 13. My uncle. No woman was good enough for him. He had several girlfriends who wanted to live with him and build a real relationship. He always refused to commit. He is now well into his 70s and spends his days alone. When we see him, he rants about how women ruined his life and no one wants to take care of him. It is really sad. A bit of therapy in his 20s or 30s could have radically changed his life. Story 14. One of my aunts, I am pretty sure, was a closet lesbian. I never knew her to date or have a significant other. It was a very religious family, and growing up in the 1940s and 1950s was not a good environment for coming out, if she even was. Different times. Story 15. I do. I had a friend who was very socially skilled. He declined many suitors. Then he had a spinal injury, lost all of his hair, underwent 3 surgeries, and died of pneumonia alone. Heartbreaking. Story 16. My brother and I had a pretty emotionally turbulent childhood, and never had any examples of functional or happy romantic relationships in our lives. He has told me several times that he never saw the point of even trying to date or marry because he feels he has no idea how to be in a functional relationship. He is 55 years old, and I have never heard any indication that he has had a girlfriend or been dating. He lives with my mother. I suspect he is also on the autism spectrum, so I think that factors in as well. Story 17. My uncle saved every penny his whole life, skipped vacations, never splurged, and passed away before retirement. Still haunts me. Story 18. A lady in her 90s in my small town was supposed to get married when she was young. The man never showed up to the wedding, so she remained single her whole life. She has a furniture store, and it is still open today. Story 19. Yes, I get to tell her story again after less than 2 weeks. My mother's godmother, who practically raised her in some ways, lived during a time when poorer Italian men would often kidnap the women they were interested in and rape them so that society would force the women to marry the men as a way of securing a wife. She was the first woman in my town to report the ordeal rather than get married. She did it without the worst part happening by convincing the man she would marry him anyway. Then she saw her aunt during the engagement party and whispered to her to call the police. She was a very affectionate old woman to us, always had a hot potato going under the ash in her fireplace for me to eat, and used to clean and prepare huge jars of fresh lentils for us that were cradles of deliciousness. She died after a long fight to obtain the specific spot she wanted in the cemetery. Apparently, there were specific traditions back in the day, but I do not know much about them. She was not just fighting to be buried near her family. She fought harshly and never lost her wits until her last months. Honorable mention. She had a very big room in an older residential area of my town that was full of chickens. She provided us with fresh eggs weekly and, apparently, goat milk when I was very young. She had one of those very old South Italian houses in which the living room also had stables, usually for donkeys, but she had a goat instead. Story 20. My paternal uncle was very important to me. He once told me he never married because the ones he wanted did not want him, and the ones who wanted him he did not want. He was very close to his mother and retired to move back home to take care of her when she became ill. He had hobbies and friends but lived long enough to see both fade away with time. Despite several health issues of his own, I never heard him complain. I can only aspire to be as good a man as he was. After his second heart attack, when the doctor told him there was nothing to be done except go to hospice, I told him I wanted to be with him when it was time for him to go. I had used all of my vacation, sick, and personal time being with him by that point, so I sat with him in hospice after work, and a cousin sat with him during the day. The day he died, my aunt and cousins were with him when I came in. After work, he told them he loved them, which he never said to anyone as they left. We sat and talked for a while, and he seemed no different than any other day. He told me he wanted to rest a bit, so I sat and read as he slept. His breathing got rough, and the nurse told me he was close. I held his hand and stroked his forehead as he slipped away. That was many years ago, and I still miss him terribly. Story 21. My grandmother divorced back in the 1960s and never got involved with a man again. She passed away in 2018. She hated men, but to be fair, one took her son to California and never came back, and her second husband went to prison for murder. I can't say I blame her. Story 22. My maternal grandmother married a much older man. He was in his 50s, and she was in her early 20s when they were married. He died in a work accident while operating heavy machinery for a commercial construction company. My grandmother never remarried and loved him deeply until the day she died. They had one child together before he passed. My mother. I remember my grandmother as a quiet, happy, and gentle woman, traits she passed on to my mother. I miss her and often think of her and my mother, who has also passed. Story 23. Sometimes you just don't find the person. My aunt was pretty attractive, and I guess if she wanted to, she could have settled for any old guy. But she believed it was better to be alone and happy than with someone and unhappy. She had a bunch of friends and family, traveled, earned great money. Honestly, she did it all except get married and have children. I know she eventually wanted to, but it wasn't in the cards, so she accepted it and moved on until she eventually died. I see the future and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Story 24. Not dead yet, but probably soon. Alcoholism, gambling addiction, and general depression. Basically, why he is alone and will die alone. Story 25. I've known plenty of people like that. Danny was gay but also a strong believer in Church of Christ brand Christianity. He never looked for someone because he believed it was sinful, and the church praised him for it at his funeral. Jason was a pedophile at the same church. As near as anyone could tell, he never acted on his urges. He ended up killing himself with his suicide letter saying that the urges were too strong and it was the only way out he saw. Opinion was split heavily on whether he did something noble or not. I remember the dead look on his parents' faces. He was in his mid-30s when he did it. More than anything else about him, and the way that dead look turned to sheer hatred when they saw the false condolences the church leaders had to offer. I also had an aunt who never married and lived with relatives her whole life. She was considered to be a bit touched in the head, but no one could say exactly what her story was. She didn't act autistic or bipolar or depressed or anything like that. She was just a bit off. Most of my family assumed she didn't want to get married because she was comfortable living with her sister and didn't want that to end. My guess is that she was asexual, but I never asked her. She was a lovely woman, and she had the largest cookbook collection I've ever seen, but she just had zero interest in romantic relationships. Story 26. My grandmother's sister wanted to marry a man who moved to Canada. She did not want to go, so they broke up. Years later, he came to visit, and when he sat in her chair, she realized she never wanted a man again. Story 27. My mom is still alive, but she has been independent for decades. She occasionally goes on dates, but she thoroughly enjoys being single and having her own space. She is the opposite of my dad, who is on his third marriage and cannot handle being single for more than a couple of weeks. Story 28. My aunt was a lovely young woman in the 1950s. She fell in love with the handsome young priest in our Catholic church, and he loved her too. It caused a minor scandal when they danced only with each other all night at a wedding. He was transferred to a different church right after that. She died alone many years later. I did not know this story until after she died. Story 29. I think I am this person. The pandemic kept me from seeing people, and I have just kept to myself since. I feel much happier when I am at home with my dogs. They are always happy to see me, and I do not have to deal with anyone else's nonsense. I hope that I am just in a stage of life where I am pulling myself together after multiple years of difficult relationships with my mother and a fiancé. Story 30. Well, he isn't dead, but my friend from work. He's older than me and retired in his late 70s. He was living with and engaged to a woman at some point earlier in life, but they ended up breaking up. I never found out why, and it seems intrusive to ask. He's a great guy, intelligent and fun, easy to talk to. He gets out plenty, socializes, and so on. He's just fine living alone and doesn't care to change that. I worry about him as he gets older. He needs hip surgery, and my husband and I have offered to take care of him at our house after the operation, but I don't think he believes we're serious. Story 31. My wife's uncle had girlfriends here and there over the years, but he was largely alone and died alone. He surrounded himself with feral cats and, ironically, fell and hit his head while feeding them outside during the winter. He developed a hematoma and died shortly after. He seemed fairly content. Some people hate others more than they hate loneliness, I guess. Story 32. My uncle was a Vietnam veteran who was exposed to Agent Orange and who my grandmother described as scary and changed after he came back from overseas. In my youth, I remember him being odd, and he had a dog named Uzi that would bite anyone who was not him. Luckily, it was a very small dog. He collected guns and had an additional gate installed in a hallway to get to his apartment. Then I went off to college and started a career. I had heard since then that he got rid of his guns and was collecting old cameras, and he was scammed while banking via his web television service. I saw him once as an adult. My grandmother, who at the time finally knew where he lived because he had disappeared for a while, took me to see him while visiting from out of town. He sat down in the van. We did not go into his place. He looked at me, said nothing, and then started ranting toward my grandmother about how the Jewish people at the Department of Veterans Affairs will not help him, or something to that effect. Apparently, he was using heroin, and to say he was mentally ill is likely an understatement. About this time last year, we learned that he passed away in late 2023. There was no funeral and no one in the family knew at the time. Really just an absolute tragedy. Sure, he had his failings, but I would say in this and many cases, the system, the military, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the lack of access to resources failed him as well. Rest in peace, Uncle Ed, you absolute maniac. I have a photo print of him in a frame in storage in my basement from Vietnam where he is holding an M60. Absolutely wild. Story 33. I remember my old neighbor. She really valued her independence and did not want to compromise for anyone. Honestly, she seemed content with her choice. Story 34. This will be me. I am happy with myself, love living alone, and cannot justify being responsible for someone else's happiness. Story 35. Yes, though he is not dead, he is in his mid-60s and lives on his own. I have known him for 35 years, and he has had 2 girlfriends in that time, neither of which lasted longer than 6 months. I asked him 5 years ago why he never settled down and if he did not miss having relationships, company, children, and so on. His reply was, I am alone but not lonely. I have my own house and can go wherever and do whatever I want. Plus, looking at all our mutual friends over the years and their ups and downs with relationships, divorces, and children, I just do not need the stress of it all. Story 36. My older neighbor growing up was a lesbian but never got married because of the stigma. She was such a nice lady too. Story 37. As a 27-year-old introvert who has never been in a relationship, this thread feels like reading into the future. Story 38. My aunt had a couple of short relationships in her wild 20s, but since then, she has been single and seemingly enjoyed every second. She is someone who loves company but could not deal with relationship problems. She has traveled a lot and had many good times. She is now in her late 70s and has no money because she spent it all on shoes and miscellaneous items. Story 39. According to the United States Census, about 30% of people remain single for the majority of their lives. It is not uncommon. Story 40. My uncle did. He spent his life with his dogs and obsessively collecting vinyl records. When he died of cancer, his house was like a throwback to the 1960s and 1970s. No fitted kitchen, coal fire in the living room for winter. The only room I ever saw him have decorated was the bathroom, but even that was made to look in keeping with the rest of the house. It was a sad day when we finished emptying the house of all his worldly belongings, only to see this old shell. Even sadder was seeing how the developer who bought it absolutely ruined it. Story 41. 2 of my uncles were both alcoholics. One was a sociopath and the other had bipolar disorder. One was a danger to society and died drunk, alone on a pornography, alcohol, and drug binge. The other could not stop loving a married woman, in a decade-long on-and-off relationship, and died alone from a massive heart attack. Story 42. That will be me. My reason is that I have never thought much about relationships. I was too busy worrying about other things, and when I finally had the mental space to think about them, they did not seem like an interesting prospect. Story 43. I wish I knew the reason behind this. I went to college with a guy. Such a sad story. He was talented, smart, and good-looking. He was unrequitedly in love with my college roommate from junior high onward. He never lived with anyone, never had a girlfriend, no children, yet was social, out, drinking and partying with friends all the time. He invited me to events and came to mine. He died alone in the first year of the pandemic from alcohol-related issues, and the landlord found him after some time had passed. Very young to die that way. We are all still deeply affected by it. Story 44. Several guys I know from college have lots of friends and get along with their families. I have never seen them with any kind of romantic partner. They are probably asexual and quite happy with their lives, but I like to think that they are all secretly in a gay polyamorous relationship together. It is my private headcanon that I will never say out loud in real life. Story 45. About 20 years ago, I worked with a man who was a Vietnam veteran. I knew him for only a couple of years. He was nice enough, but one of the quietest people I have ever met. He would go home from work on Friday and literally not say a word to anyone until returning to work on Monday. He was never married and had no family other than a sister whom he rarely saw. Story 46. My grandma was married for about 5 years, maybe a little longer, before my grandfather left her for his other family. She was always a mean, bitter woman. She spent the last 50 years of her life alone and died with only the grandchildren being a part of her life. I only really had a relationship with her as an adult because I would have felt too guilty not talking to her. But she was a very unpleasant person. She spoke badly about us and said we were screw-ups, and that mental health issues were not real and that we were just weak. I couldn't trust her or be vulnerable with her. She literally died alone on Thanksgiving in hospice during a brief break when my sister left to start dinner, and I was on my way from dinner at the in-laws. I feel bad for her to have lived such a sad life because of her own bitterness. I see her in me sometimes, and I am determined to take care of my health and not alienate everyone around me. Story 47. A lot of really sad stories here. I was hoping for more happy asexual or aromantic people, or at least folks who just weren't interested for other reasons. My great-aunt died single and never married. I suspect she was a lesbian. She kept her hair short, went by a masculine version of her birth name, and worked in a women's prison for a while. She was such an interesting woman. At one point, she took in a random old lady who insulted her at the grocery store because her health was failing and she lived alone. She just struck up a conversation with her in response, learned that, and helped. The old lady was a hoarder who lived in her trailer instead of her house a lot, but my aunt cleaned some of it up for her. This is all from memory, so I don't know if I have all the details right, but I know for sure she took in an older lady. My aunt died in her mid-60s, never having married or had a known partner. Story 48. Well, I'm still alive, but at 43, I've never had, and by choice will never have, a partner, and I'll likely end up dying alone. It's not such a horrible thing. I'm hoping I'll look back at the end of my life knowing I've helped make some people happy with my music and been kind to the people whose lives have intersected with mine. To be honest, I hope that the end of my life can be as little a burden to others as possible. I wear a fake wedding ring, and my friends know not to think of me as single at social occasions. For me, the initial reason was complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But at this point, I'm at peace with my past and just happier with my small, simple, celibate life. Story 49. Many people are mostly truly introverted. Some are also on the autism spectrum or have narcissistic traits, making them unwilling to accommodate others. Many struggle with weight issues, causing them to feel undeserving of love or unattractive to others. Some have had brief marriages or relationships, but for the most part, they are happier alone. Story 50. Laziness and entitlement. Grandma's firstborn was born with a life expectancy of 1 week, then 1 month, then 1 year, and so on. My aunt survived but was extremely disabled, so she was grandma's dependent until grandma died. The second-born thought it was unfair to expect him to do something with his life when his sister was not held to the same standard. Grandma just did not have the energy to fight him on it. She was a single mother with 9 kids in an era where she had few rights. She was tired. Growing up, the only time I saw him emerge from his room was to either grab food that grandma cooked, which he ate in his room instead of with the family, or if he heard that my mom was visiting and he needed to show off to her. He stayed in his childhood bedroom until grandma died. Then he offered to take over for his sister and immediately disappeared with his sister, who again was severely disabled. When his sister died, he did not tell anyone. We found out nearly a year after her passing. He ended up dying alone and unloved because no one would forgive him for what he did with his sister. I do not know what the afterlife might look like, but I hope my grandma and her daughter are together again. Best friends forever. Story 51. This will be me, I suspect, as I am asexual and have no desire to have a relationship. I have good friends, a great sibling, and I am a surrogate aunt to several nieces and nephews. I am happy with that. Story 52. Sure, a decent chunk of my family on my mother's side. It worked out in previous generations since those who partnered up had many children, But I wonder if the generation below me will be the last for us. Of my 3 aunts and uncles there, only one is heterosexual and has children. Of my grandfather's siblings, I think 4 out of 9 either never had partners or lost them before I was born. My generation of 5 is too young to tell for sure with the youngest, but I suspect only 2 to 3 will have children. Of the 3 adults in this generation, ages 28 to 37, only the youngest has a partner and no one is married. We are all fairly self-contained, and there is a spectrum of interest in dating. I, for instance, will occasionally decide to put in some effort to go on dates and enter relationships, but if I do not meet anyone I connect with within about 6 weeks, I stop trying. If that leads to me being single forever, that is fine. I have a great life with a full social and activity calendar. I am doing well financially, and there is obviously no family pressure to settle down. If I meet someone amazing, that would be lovely, but if not, I am happy as I am. Story 53. My grandmother was always a bit of a black sheep in her trio of siblings. She had 2 older brothers. There was some abuse in their childhood. All 3 dealt with it. I think she suffered the most and got involved with some unpleasant crowds in her 20s. She had a daughter, my mother, but was often absent. She would leave for days or a week at a time on drug binges and was emotionally abusive besides. Eventually, long after my mother had moved out and had me, she had no friends. Everyone in her old crowd lost contact when she had a severe car accident and needed spinal surgery. She spent years in recovery and became dependent on her pain medication during that time. She was a very kind and lovely woman when she was sober, but given her habits when younger and her dependence on opioids later, she was never a pleasant person to be around. She displayed vindictive, manipulative, and bullying behavior toward anyone she could mistreat, always one-on-one. If others were present, she would revert to a sweet demeanor with veiled condescension. We had all seen that side of her. Eventually, my mother cut ties to focus on starting her own life and getting established. It was the only way to have peace for a few years. Because of how she was mistreated in her life and the kinds of people she surrounded herself with, she failed to foster meaningful or long-lasting connections with the rest of the family. Hurt people hurt people. In the last month of her life, she expressed to me that she wished to see her home state one more time before she passed, and that she did not want to go alone. She passed away shortly after without having seen her home state and was alone at the time. Tragic. Story 54. He treated women poorly and acted like everyone owed him something just for existing and putting in the bare minimum effort. Story 55. Yeah, my old neighbor Mr. Glenn. Never married, no children, just him and his garden. He could grow tomatoes that would make a chef cry. He said he never found the right chaos to match his peace. He spent his life fixing bicycles for neighborhood children and yelling at squirrels. He died alone, sure, but definitely not unloved. Story 56. My uncle died in March from liver cancer with me and my sister by his side. He was 63. He struggled with alcoholism and had a difficult personality. He was married for a short period of time. Story 57. Well, she is not dead yet, but my cousin has been single for more than my entire life. It was an abusive relationship. I do not know anything else, but she lived at her family home to help her mother take care of her ailing father and stayed. She could not have been more than her early 20s when she left that relationship and is well into her 50s now. She seems happy and has done a lot with her life other than the whole marriage and children thing. Story 58, 2 examples, both somewhat downbeat. My aunt and a cousin. My aunt struggled with bipolar disorder her entire adult life. I don't think she was stable enough or willing to compromise to have a long-term relationship. She owned her own home and maintained a good social circle throughout her life, mostly engaging in shorter-term relationships. In the end, she died young. I wish I had spent more time with her, but she had a fairly interesting life, even if it was not always conventionally happy. The second example is a cousin who fits this pattern more closely. She never had a known relationship but was somewhat close to family. She struggled with depression and eventually took her own life. Story 59. I am not dead yet. I am fairly attractive but have flaws. I am 50 years old, work in corporate life, and have my stuff together. I kept meeting cheaters or narcissists. I worked way too many hours thinking that was how to get ahead. I do not know. Maybe someone will write how nice and helpful I was when I die. Story 60. My aunt will be this person and so will I. When you say spending most of their life, I am 31, so God willing, I still have most of my life ahead of me. My aunt is in her 60s and has never had a serious long-term relationship. No marriage and no children. She has a long-term roommate that we have all speculated is actually a girlfriend, but honestly, from talking to her and seeing their home, I really do not think that is the case. She seems so happy. Story 61. My aunt has been in a few medium-length relationships, lasting 2 or 3 years each, but has never shown interest in marriage or having children. She will be 71 on her next birthday. She has lived alone and with others. She stayed with my family for 6 months after her twin sister, who was married but separated from her husband, died. Currently, she lives with her brother and his wife, who have a special needs adult son and have also adopted their granddaughter, who is now 10 years old. She enjoys being near other people but has said, I get restless and want to try living somewhere else. She has no interest in romance or relationships and has not been interested for many years. She prefers the life she has. Story 62. I hope I am this kind of person. I don't take care of myself and I don't like doing things or going places. I'm not comfortable being alone, but being around other people and things stresses me out too much. Sometimes, I get really angry and restless. Story 63. I was a nurse's aide in a nursing home with the then oldest woman in the United States, who was 114 years old and always single. Her sister was also over 100 years old. Both never married. I am not sure what you mean by died alone. Do you mean they did not have a partner or that they had no friends or family at all? Both of these women were in their sound minds and were surrounded by caregivers, with family who visited when they died of old age. Story 64. My brother is 42, but his friends and I suspect he will continue to be alone forever. He had a girlfriend once when he was 28 years old, which lasted 6 to 9 months. She already had a 5-year-old son. He was happy to start living with them both and was looking for a house for all of them. She broke up with him, though he tried to convince her not to. The breakup hit him hard, and he decided he would never again go drinking and socializing with friends because that was how he met his ex-girlfriend. He thought fate should naturally bring two people together. He has many good qualities, fit, good-looking, has an engineering degree, can cook, and is good with kids. My brother and I have many friends in common, and in private we cannot understand why he does not want to go out and meet people again. Sometimes they have said a woman flirted with him, but he has not picked up the cues to ask her out. He is also into cycling, often going on long rides with his male friends or by himself, which is again not a great way to meet women. I feel sorry for him because he has always been a patient and fun uncle with my children. To be honest, I think he should have had therapy years ago like I did to deal with our family issues. In my humble opinion, he is trapped in a cycle of shame, guilt, and resentment that makes him feel he does not deserve good things. Unfortunately, he refuses to talk to me about any of this. Slowly, over the last 5 years, he has been pushing me away, not returning my calls, prioritizing work over time with me and my children who adored him, and avoiding discussions about substantial matters. In our last meaningful interaction, I gave him a photo I found of us as little happy kids, smiling as I held him on my lap. He looked at it briefly, then gave it back to me, saying, I live in the present. Story 65. I have 2 examples. One is my uncle who is still alive, almost 80, never married. He is a good-looking, fit man with a full head of dark hair and has money. He has dated throughout his entire life but never settled down. He became very set in his ways in his 30s and 40s regarding his schedule and lifestyle and could never compromise with a roommate for long. He is very good to his nieces and nephews and is treated like a grandparent. When he gets older and needs assistance, there will be enough of us around to help. The other example is my wife's great aunt. She was engaged in her home country but left him and moved here for some reason. She never married or dated again, to anyone's knowledge. When she grew very old, some of her nieces and nephews had to step up to manage her finances and care. Her cognitive function was declining, and she insisted that her family contact the family of her ex-fiancé from 70 years ago. She was incredulous that his children and grandchildren with his later wife should not be responsible for taking care of her. Needless to say, no one contacted that family. Story 66. My sister-in-law, who is never married and has had no long-term relationships, has alienated my wife and me. She is toxic and thinks she knows everything better than doctors. She feels the need to belittle and talk down to us. She will die alone. Story 67. My aunt was a successful, interesting, compassionate, and energetic person. She was also a narcissistic perfectionist. She had many relationships over the years, but as she got older, her standards became impossibly high. She died surrounded by family, but she never found a partner who met her standards. Story 68. I feel like Mystic River. This part you do alone. We all die alone, hopefully with less stabbing. Story 69. My great-uncle was a Christian brother who spent a good portion of his life teaching and establishing a high school in Papua New Guinea. He was from Australia. Fortunately, he had 4 sisters and a large extended family, so I believe he always felt loved. Story 70. I don't want a romantic partner, so I will die alone. I am aromantic asexual. I fill my life with friends and adventures, but I don't want to date or be with someone romantically. That doesn't mean I lack meaningful relationships. One of my uncles was similar. He seemed to have many female friends but never married or had anyone he called a girlfriend. He was a lifelong bachelor and veteran, and many people miss him. I wish I had known him better. We lived across the country from each other. Story 71. I'm sitting on my deck thinking about it. I knew a guy up north, awesome and genuine, but his job pulled him down. If I hadn't been a teenager at the time, I would have shared our lives together. Story 72. I worked at a women's shelter, and one of my coworkers had worked there for years. She was well past retirement age but never retired. I'm not sure why she never had a relationship or children. Her mother had died many years before, and she still grieved her. Her father was still alive in a care home, and she was always caring for him. She passed away suddenly in her sleep. She was so sweet, kind, and full of joy. Years later, I can't bring myself to delete her number from my phone or our text messages. She used to send me memes about spreadsheets. Wherever you are, Gail, I love you and I'm thinking of you. Story 73. Other than not being dead yet, I fit that description. I don't understand how people can want to be around others all the time or at any time. It's a need I don't have. I need to be alone because that's the only time I feel free. Having other people's wants, needs, and schedules to take into account feels horrible. Like, go live your life somewhere away from me, so I can live mine away from you. I don't mean that in an antisocial way though. Let me try to illustrate what I mean. To me, there is a sphere of invisible baggage and obligation around everyone. I don't want that sphere to touch me. I want to be outside them because out here is freedom. I don't know if I'm getting my feelings across. The freedom of being alone is amazing, and people don't realize this because they haven't tried it. They haven't even considered it as an option because of social pressures and not feeling strong enough to go their own way. Obviously, I'm not talking about people like me. I know there are others. Story 74. It will probably happen to me. Outside of the few people I have known my whole life, I am generally not interesting or liked by strangers, so I tend to keep to myself. Adding all the extra aspects such as being queer, black, and deeply physically unattractive, it makes sense that I will die alone. I have been working on being okay with this my whole life. It is hard but unavoidable. Story 75. As a demisexual with no relationship experience, the responses feel like a window into my future, to be honest. Part of me hates the idea of dying without experiencing a relationship and wonders if I should just find someone and settle. But the other part of me knows that changing my life for someone I do not like is worse than being alone. Story 76. What do you mean by died alone? Do you mean no friends or family around, or just single? If it is the latter, that will be me. I have been single for most of my adult life and will almost certainly remain so. Story 77. My uncle took a girl on a date once and told her to dress up. Then he took her to McDonald's, so I guess some people are just not meant for dating. He never wanted children and only makes friends with homeless people, even though he has a lot of money. He is completely estranged from the family. He can be very kind but is just a loner. He likes to keep to himself, never goes to the doctor, just goes to work, then home. He plays with the dog and drinks. That is his life, and I wish we were closer. Story 78. I know a handful of people like this, though most are not deceased yet. They are just very introverted, and dating has never been their priority. There is usually a little wishing they had a partner, but most do not regret being single. They are just happier having the freedom in everyday life and having the time to dedicate to a hobby or helping others with caregiving, projects, parties, and simply providing company. Only two are neurodivergent as far as I know, but that plays a role in their introversion since they tend to be awkward in social settings. Story 79. Well, I guess I qualify. I am going to die alone because I live alone and I am old enough to pass away any day now. I am 77 today. I had a 16-year relationship in my earlier life. I learned that I am not an easy person to live with and I really prefer my solitude. I have just never met anyone else worth giving up my freedom for. Story 80. My aunt actually died at the age of 78, a virgin. Yes, you read that correctly, and yes, I know for a fact that it is true. She raised me. I asked her one time why she never went on dates or even talked about men, and she said, I was born with a difficult person. I do not need another one. I think she was so hurt by the man who married her sister that she just completely quit men in her teens. Story 81. Yes, many. Some people have difficulty forming relationships. We used to call them either high-strung or shy. Now people assign mental illness labels. Story 82. I took care of a priest who had colon cancer. He never married and had no family visit. Occasionally, people from the church stopped by. I am not religious at all, and I know priests are often misunderstood, but he was genuinely a very kind man. He died in a lot of pain, but I was in the room so he would not be alone. Story 83. Being single does not mean dying alone. A single person is not alone. They just are not in a romantic relationship. They can still have friends and family who love them and whom they love. Honestly, this type of question is based on a dated notion that you only have value if you are a heterosexual married couple with 2.5 children and a minivan. Other types of lifestyles are valid and do not need to be questioned just because they do not fit the norm. Story 84. So my husband's grandmother is kind of like this. Her husband died young after about 10 years of marriage, and she never remarried. She has a best friend named Sam, who she will adamantly say, she's just my friend. I'm not a lesbian. She just has a guy's name. But she is at the end of her life, almost 90, and never even dated after her husband died. He lived long enough for them to have 4 children. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.